Good evening, everybody. Welcome to episode 65 of the Thrifty Marketer Talks. Today, we are discussing a very special topic. We will be discussing breaking the cycle of bullying, understanding and preventing its effects on mental health. So, I have a special guest with me. Today, I am joined by Rebecca Burd. She is the director, VP of marketing at Speak Life Performing Arts Company. It's a very interesting story they have. So, Rebecca believes bullying is an epidemic we can end. As the CEO of Create Change Productions and co-founder of Speak Life End Bullying, she co-wrote Speak Life End Bullying, the musical in 2001, an engaging musical featured in secondary schools across the country. Since the first live performance, more than 390,000 students have been impacted. In 2021, Rebecca led a team to turn the live production into an on-demand film, now viewed by over 17,000 students nationally. Now, the fight against bullying happens in any school, anywhere, at any time. Today, Rebecca is empowering a movement of moms to become mom ambassadors, which is very interesting. We will hear from her on that later. Moms can be the solutions by bringing Speak Life and Bullying to their local schools. As an industry leader in end bullying solutions for schools over 25 years, Rebecca and her team create culture shifts in schools across the nation by teaching students to speak life for a lifetime. So without further ado, let me bring her on. Hey, Rebecca, how are you?
Hello, I'm so good. How are you?
I'm good. I'm good. Thank you so much for taking time out and coming on the show. Super excited to discuss this topic, which needs obviously a lot of discussion. If you're ready, we can start off.
Yes, I'm excited. Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. Right. So bullying is something, especially I'm based out of India. There's hardly any talk about bullying, but it's a topic of discussion, at least in the US. So it's very promising to see that. So let's start with the basic question. What are some of the common types of bullying and how do they impact mental health?
Well, excellent question. I think we have seen bullying, unfortunately, evolve over many years. When my husband and I started this work in schools, it was back in 2001. We were about 2 years post Columbine at the time, and Columbine was one of the most publicized school shootings that the US had ever experienced. And it was traced back to some bullying behaviors that had taken place. And so that really began the discussion. Up until that point, the discussion that surrounded bullying was really based more at a focus on the child that was being victimized and speaking to that child and saying, hey, be better, be stronger. You can get through this. And so it wasn't really being called out for what we truly see it to be today, which is abuse. It is a form of abuse when it is ongoing. And so there's certainly a difference. I think one of the things that we always like to start talking about is that bullying has become, especially in the United States, a very used word almost in all circumstances that may have a confrontation or a verbal exchange or even a physical exchange that is not wanted. But one of the things we talk to kids about is bullying is something that is ongoing. It is a repetitive occurrence in your life that is being brought in by another person, whether it's through words or through physical actions, but it's repetitive. And so we see bullying inside our culture in many forms. It can come to us in what we all are probably more used to from our childhoods, which was more physical bullying. Oftentimes with males, we find that can be more prominent is physical bullying. But verbal bullying has also been incredibly prominent for years within schools. We see that a lot in females too, that females can sometimes use their words more strongly against one another when they're speaking to each other. But when we saw cyberbullying enter the stage, that's when things really kind of went off the charts. And I think a lot of people my age, moms, will even ask me and say, Rebecca, what's the difference between what we experienced in bullying in school, which was incredibly difficult, to what I see my kids experiencing today? And I would say cyberbullying is that difference. When kids are not able to go home anymore, shut their door, and at least end it for that day, to come into maybe the safety of their home, the safety of their relationship with their parents and their siblings, and shut those things out, it's really no longer an option for a lot of students. That bullying is chasing them home on their phones. This has really become why kids no longer can escape this type of bullying. So I still think the other two we see as very prominent. In fact, the last case that we heard, unfortunately, was a very, very sad case out of the state of New Jersey, where we saw a 14-year-old girl lose her life to suicide because of a physical bullying incident that took place in the hallway of her school that was recorded and then put online and went viral. So we see this combination of both this in-person physical and verbal abuse combining with the cyberbullying, escalating the bullying crisis to all new levels. And I know we'll get into it more, but the way that affects the student's mental health, we've seen to be significant. The statistics and the things that are coming out today are really off the charts. And what we do know is that our kids are in crisis.
Absolutely, absolutely. The moment I came across you and we started our conversation about having you as a guest, I have been reading about bullying. The statistics are crazy.
Yes.
I have a son. I'm really worried about cyberbullying to a major extent as they grow up. Right. So I'm at least glad that there are people like you who are doing something in your capabilities with your team to address it head on and do whatever you can to help this crisis. Right. So the next question is, how do victims of bullying cope with the psychological effects of bullying?
Well, we have seen the way kids cope to be most of the time very harmful to themselves. We have seen that bullying has created a crisis in many areas involving self-harm and addiction. Kids go home and they deal on a regular basis with anxiety and depression. And all of those things, unfortunately, lead to the most harmful. And one of the top ways we're seeing teen loss today, which is through suicide. And so kids are taking on these pressures of bullying, especially cyberbullying. And because they can't find an escape, they're looking for ways to cope. And oftentimes those ways that they're coping are actually becoming forms of self-abuse because they're looking for outlets. They're looking for places to deal with the pain and the onslaught of what it's doing to their mental health. And unfortunately, most of our students don't have the tools. They're not being given the proper tools to understand the difference between what it is to cope and what it is to work through resiliency. Resiliency in an effective way, in a way that actually brings healing in these situations, as opposed to additional hurt inside the lives of these kids. And so the coping and what it's causing kids to do in the long run, both short-term and long-term, because a lot of kids we also see are just giving up on their dreams and the futures that they envision for themselves because of the words that were spoken to them, because of the things that have been said to them. They get so beat down on a mental level that they just bring down their own self-talk, how they feel about themselves, how they see themselves. It diminishes to such a degree that they're no longer pursuing their dreams and they're no longer in that life pursuit of what they're truly meant to do on this earth. And so we see so many kids missing out on their futures because of what's happening today.
Right. It's really sad that these kind of things are rising day by day. Right. So now let's talk about prevention of it, right? So how can parents and educators especially identify and prevent bullying in school? As you mentioned, school is one of the major avenues for bullying. So how can they identify and prevent bullying at schools?
Well, I think that one of the things we have to come to terms with, both as educators and as parents, is that the bullying's happening. There's no question. And we go often into schools over the years and they'll see the film, and we'll even have administrators come to us afterwards and say, oh, well, we don't have that type of bullying in our school. And then, we'll take 2 steps to the left and talk to a student and they'll say, oh, that happened last week. So whether we're seeing it or we're not seeing it, and even for us as parents, I mean, I have teen boys And so I'm in that stage of life myself with teen boys who were navigating the phones and all of these, life situations with them. Even though we want to believe that our kids are in the safe cocoon that we work so hard to sort of try and create for them in our homes, we need to understand that there's so much that's slipping in between the cracks, that our kids are more than likely facing an onslaught of words or potentially even physical forms of abuse that are coming from some area of their life.
Right.
We also have to come to terms with the fact that a lot of our kids are participating in these things because they're so caught up in their own survival. A lot,
Right.
and I know we'll talk about that in some further questions down the road here. But what can we do? What can a parent do? What can a teacher or administrator do to start affecting change? Well, I think first we need to acknowledge that there's a problem. There's a problem
Yes.
everywhere. We all have this problem. So we all need to come together and say, okay, what are we going to do about it? And unfortunately, I will kind of preface this and say, although we all must get involved, we also need to acknowledge the fact that the solution really does lie with our kids. We need to empower them with the proper tools to know how this change can take place peer to peer, because truly that's how we're going to create significant change and significant shift in culture, because that's truly what needs to happen. If we remain where we are as a culture, where people who have the loudest voice, people who are speaking and maybe not speaking out of places of kindness and life, if they've got the platform and the people that want to speak positive things are being pushed down, we are lopsided in our culture. It becomes the survival of the fittest. And what we need to do is we need to bring life-giving words and life-giving actions to be what's valued in our schools and in our homes. It needs to be what's taught. It needs to be what's valued. And then it needs to be what's the practical tools of how to do that, which I know we'll talk about more too, are things that need to be taught to our kids on a daily basis so that there is peer-to-peer change taking place. And as parents and as administrators, we need to be having these discussions. We must create safe places for these discussions to happen with our students. And so as administrators, I want to encourage and empower you to bring in programs that are making a difference. There are people that are dedicating their lives to creating programs that can create significant impact in the lives of kids. And our kids need these programs. And it's worth taking educational time away to bring these programs in, because the students will even tell you their mental health and what their pain that they're so caught up in. If we want them to excel academically, we need to first address what's going on in their soul and in their mind. Because if those two things are not in alignment, they're not going to be successful in their education. They're not going to be successful in their future pursuits. So it's worth taking time away. It's worth it as parents to take time away on a daily basis to cultivate spaces of conversation with our kids, even in small little moments that allow them to know, Mom and Dad are listening. We're here. Let's have the conversation. You may not be ready right now, but I'm just opening it up because just in case you are, I'm right here. I'm ready to listen. So I think all of those things are significantly important.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Communication is the key there. I can totally agree to that. Right. Let's talk about bit macro stuff, like, for example, society. How do societal norms and cultural expectations contribute to the perpetuation of bullying behavior?
Well, I think the word expectation is a key one, because there are so many expectations on our kids today. The pressures that they face, the pressures to achieve, the pressures to get ahead and to make something of themselves, the comparison that occurs daily on social media when they open up and they see a very well cultivated reel of somebody's life that isn't reality. It isn't truly what's going on. We're not seeing the hard stuff. This is what kids are faced with. And, we remember back when we were in school, we would deal with comparison and we deal with what, how is the person next to me achieving and how am I achieving? That alone was hard when we were dealing with it on an in-person level. But when you go home and you're alone and you're dealing with all of these feelings and you open up your social media and now you're just being faced with it in your scroll, kids are being bombarded. The expectations are so high. And it's why a lot of kids, we're losing kids so much younger to suicide than we ever have before. I can't tell you how many stories I'm hearing of 12-year-olds that we're losing day after day to this issue, because at 12 years old, their little mind cannot even conceive that the pain and the pressure that they're feeling will ever be released, will ever be better, because they haven't come to a place of development yet inside themselves to understand those things. And so we need to be very, very careful about the expectations that we're placing on our students and how they're being pushed. And I think that what it does is it pushes kids to what I like to call survival mode. When kids move into a survival mode, what they're doing is just figuring out, how do I get from the beginning of this day to the end of this day without becoming the target of somebody else's negative words or negative actions. And sometimes in the course of surviving, they'll find themselves in situations where suddenly they're participating in these activities of potentially putting someone else down or having to step on somebody else just so that they can get a little bit further up the ladder, or that they don't become the target themselves. And so it becomes a cycle that we have to break. And that's what comes down to, how do we begin to shift culture? Because we need kids to realize that the expectation upon them is to just truly be the person that they are, that they get to be loved and accepted and valued for exactly who they are, which is nothing like the person sitting next to them. There's already that person in the world. They don't need to be that person. They need to be truly who they were meant to be. And we need to value that in them. And we need to value kindness. We need to value who they are more than what they're doing. And the culture expectation needs to become, what is your character? Who are you to the person next to you? How do you treat the people that you come in contact in your world every single day? When that becomes the number one thing that our society values, that's when culture begins to shift. And that's when kids begin to value that for themselves. And that's where we can begin to see some change.
Absolutely. I totally agree with that. Being true to yourself, taking the pressure off kids is very vital these days.
Yes.
It's not only school, it's friends, it's family members, everybody is adding on to that. So it's better to create that open space of communication and support them. Right.
Absolutely.
So based on, you have tremendous experience in this particular area. And I've never come across anybody who has worked on this area for such a long time. So according to you, what are some of the effective strategies you have seen working for breaking the cycle of bullying in schools and communities?
Well, I think the greatest key that we have found in breaking the cycle is engaging empathy. When kids can see beyond themselves. So kids are so caught up in all of these expectations, all the things they need to accomplish and achieve on a daily basis. The stresses and the pressures are so heavy that it becomes very difficult for them to see outside themselves, or to even see that the person sitting next to them is dealing with exactly the same thing. And so the power, Brene Brown says in her research that the two most powerful words in the English language are Me Too. When we can create Me Too moments for students where they begin to be able to take what they know as head knowledge. So do we know that we should be kind to people? Yes, every child knows that. Do we know that we need to watch our words and watch our actions when we're dealing with it? Yes, parents are talking about it, teachers are talking about it, we're hearing it all the time. So why can't we take that head knowledge and engage it into action? To me, that missing element is empathy. Until we can engage in empathetic response, until we can have students actually begin to feel how their words and actions are landing on their peer, it's going to be very hard for them to move past what they're dealing with and begin to create that change in others. What we say as a company often is that if you want a student to do something, they need to feel something. And that is true for all of us. It's why we all are drawn to our movies. It's why we're drawn to art. It's why we're drawn to our books and to our stories, because those stories, first of all, they say me too. We suddenly feel like, hey, I'm not alone. If somebody wrote that story or wrote that movie or wrote that book, that means other people are struggling with what I'm struggling with. So we feel seen, we feel heard, we feel understood. So when we can get kids to feel seen, heard, and understood, and let them know, hey, you know what? I see you. I understand you. I know what you're going through. And guess what? You're not alone. That person sitting next to you, they're going through that as well. So what if we pause and we just think for a minute about their story, about what are they going through? What are they experiencing today? when we can get students to see past themselves enough to want to engage even in the concept that somebody
Right.
else is feeling pain and it's not just me, we get them to think then when that word or action starts to surface up and it wants to come out, they'll stop and they'll pause and they'll say, oh, you know what? Let me think this through. Let me react
Right.
differently. What if I do it a little differently? And I had a student, I'll just give you a great example. I had a student one time who came to me and said that there was a story where he had a kid that he sat next to in history class all the time. And no matter what the exchange was between the two of them, it was always negative. Like they could not get along. And he finally got to a point where he just went, you know what? I don't really know what else to do. But he was sitting there one day and the kid turned around, started talking to him, and it became a negative exchange. And he said, hey, you know what? My birthday is coming up this weekend. Would you want to come to my party? And totally stopped this kid in his tracks. And he looked back at him and he said, yeah, I'll come. And he comes to the party. He has an incredible time with this other child's family. They begin to get along. Well, long story short, a year later, this child was like another family member inside this family. They end up cultivating a best friendship out of this. And
Right.
I said to this young man, I said, what was the difference? He said, I changed the conversation. He said, I made it positive. I went
Right.
from all the negative things and I just invited him into a positive situation and I changed it up. And so what if we teach kids that power to say a simple word, a simple invitation, a simple moment could change the whole conversation. And I think that is the power of empathy. And it's what we must do if we're going to change this for our students.
Absolutely, empathy is the key, even for adults, not only
Yeah.
kids. It's a key thing in today's world. Yeah. Let's talk about mental health professionals a bit.
Yeah.
So, mental health professionals, how can they help individuals who have been affected by bullying to heal and recover?
I think what mental health professionals are doing is so incredibly important. I think it's needed on a level that we've never seen before. I will
Right.
tell you that we have done some partnerships with a neuropsychologist recently. Actually, we're a part of a book together, and it's called The Musical Imprint. And we were actually talking about the power of music and the power of how that imprints on our heart and mind and really does engage empathy.
Oh,
And what I loved about my conversations with her is she just said, Rebecca, if we could take mental health professionals and educators and combine them with the power that artists have to tell story and to connect to emotion and feeling, what we could provide for our students in regards to giving them the resources that they truly need could change this whole thing. And so I think that our mental health professionals, they have the tools. They have so many practical tools that can help our kids really learn how to not just find their way through, but even find their way out of situations that are no longer healthy, to find their way out of relationships that are no longer healthy, and to find places where they feel stuck and get unstuck. And I just went through myself last year, and I'm in my late 40s. So there is no point in which we do not need this help.
right.
I think the more we're gaining it and the more we're getting it from our childhood all through our adulthood, the better we become as humans and the better we're able to interact and treat others. And so she helped me in so many areas of past hurt and past traumas that I'd experienced. What did I experience there? How do I get unstuck from unhealthy patterns that have now occurred in my life because of those situations that took place? And she gave me a path forward. And so I think mental health professionals in this conversation are so important. I think our schools need more safe places and educated professionals who can come in and have these conversations with our students. And what we've done as a program is we have tried through this musical to give them a tool that opens up these conversations to have them, because students just need to feel safe and seen. Once they feel safe and seen, we need these professionals to get involved and cultivate these long-term conversations and resources for students. So I think they are very key to the long-term
Right.
solution.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I completely agree. It's, as you mentioned, there is no time wrong to go speak to somebody like a mental health professional if
No,
you're facing some struggle, right?
yeah,
Right. So one other thing which we observe with people who have gone through bullying or any trauma for that matter is they go into a shell, right? They lack in
Yes,
self-confidence and things like that. So
yes.
how can individuals who have faced bullying develop resilience and self-confidence when they face adverse situations?
I think this is so important because we have got to, first of all, I would say that the greatest key is that when we identify a student that's at risk, so we identify a student who is carrying a lot
Right.
of pain from either prolonged abuse, whether it's prolonged abuse because of a bullying situation or otherwise, we have to first identify that we have intervened and stopped that abuse. So
Right.
I think that that is one of the keys we've got to start with. And sometimes that involves the person who's experiencing it taking a step to come outside of whatever that situation is that's causing it. So, I will say to kids, and I'll say this to parents and administrators, there is nothing out of bounds to get that child out of that abuse. So we need to remember that if they're in a school situation where everything's been tried, but that child is still impacted, let's move that child to a safer location. We would do that if it was happening in a family. We would do that if it was happening in an outside environment. We would move that child away from that consistent abuse. So don't be afraid, parents. There's always another option. So if you
Right.
have tried with the school and the abuse is continuing and it's not stopping, you're not trapped. There are places that we can work. Mental health professionals can come alongside you. There's so many state resources, government resources that can come alongside you to help find another solution so that your child can still remain in great education, but not have to be confronting this abuse on a daily basis. So I would say first, do everything you possibly can to move outside of it. If the abuse is taking place here on the phone, parents get involved. Like, you need to shut down these apps, take the phone away, get rid of this. This is not vital to their future. In fact, it could be the end of a future if we don't
Right.
intervene. And there are many devices now that are available, especially parents to younger ones. I would highly recommend looking up something like a Gab phone or phones that don't get the kids right onto the internet and onto social media. We
Right.
need to have time to cultivate the resilience and the understanding of self before
Right.
this tells us who we are. So
Right.
please extend the time. Little 11 and 12-year-olds don't necessarily, they may need to contact you. That could be important, but there's resources for that. They don't necessarily need a smartphone in their hand. So be
Absolutely.
thinking about, and if I could go back, these smartphones were brand new when my kids were that age. And so I was like, oh yeah, sure, here, totally not knowing what in the world
Right.
was even on here that they could have access to. So be more educated than I was back then,
Right.
and know that today there's great resources for that. So once we've been able to remove the child from the places where this abuse is taking place, then we need to engage the resources that are there. These mental health professionals, I would say, remember that especially in the US, there are free resources to mental health professionals everywhere. Contact
Right.
local nonprofits. Look into, I know locally here in Stewart, we have something called Tykes for Teens and Tykes and Teens, and they are amazing. They have all these resources. If you can't pay for it, they'll figure it out. They're going to find a way to get your child that mental health counseling and resources that they need. So look into your local area, even talk to your local schools, see what resources are available, but don't just assume, oh, the abuse stopped, so now my child's okay. Your
Right.
child needs a safe place to be able to talk through that and be able to then build resiliency. The resiliency comes once we've removed the abuse, because then we can help them with resiliency and resources to move through the healing, because the healing itself requires great strength. It
Right.
requires the strength to continue to move forward and do the work that it's going to take to heal. So I think that's so important, because otherwise what I see is incredibly broken and hurting adults that have never had a safe place to be able to have these conversations. And I have had more conversations with 70 and 80-year-olds who can tell me the name, the place, and the moment that it happened and how their life was significantly impacted. And sometimes it was one time. So
Absolutely.
never underestimate what a child has been through or walked through. And I would just encourage people to seek out the resources, engage the resources, and keep your child in those programs and in those things until you see them thriving, and
Right.
and help them move to that place of pain to thrive, because it can happen.
Absolutely, absolutely. So do whatever it takes. That's the message.
Whatever it
To
takes.
absolutely right. So most of the time, what happens is people are not even aware of bullying happening in front of them. Right.
Yes.
Sometimes we are there, but we are not doing anything. So my next question is about the bystanders. Right.
Mhm.
What role do bystanders play in preventing bullying, and how can they be empowered to take action?
Well, when I read through all your questions, this was the most exciting one because we will say that in 25 years of being in schools, bystanders are the solution. If we can engage that 70%, that's how large that group is in our
Wow.
schools and in our communities. We are an army. We are an army that can change this for everyone. Because when we begin to shift culture and we begin to say, that doesn't happen, not on my watch. When I'm here, the people around me are going to receive kindness. They're going to receive a place where they know is safe because they know if I see something happen, I will not sit back. I will speak up and I will say something and I will
Right.
engage until there's a solution found. But that's not happening around me. As a
Right.
culture, we too often value the loudest in the room. And those people that are engaging in bullying or behaviors that are hurting others, they're hurting themselves. They're looking for the same thing that everyone's looking for, which is for love and acceptance. But they believe that they're gaining that just because they've got the attention, sometimes the
Right.
laughter, sometimes even the applause of those around them for these negative words or actions that they're speaking out. But what if we
Right.
stop clapping? What if we stop engaging? What if we say, no, like that's not funny. That's not okay. And that shouldn't happen. And instead allow that person to realize, oh, wait, when I said that or did that, I didn't get what I was looking for. When we make people fear us, we think that we're getting what we want because we think we're getting their attention. But
Right.
truly, we're all looking for the same thing, which is we want people to love us. We want people to see us and hear us and accept us. And so, if
Right.
we, as the bystander army, say, you have my love, you have my kindness, you have my acceptance, and you have the assurance that I am going to stand up, I'm going to say something, and I'm going to do something. If that was the culture within our schools, the bullying would literally be eradicated because it couldn't
Right.
exist because the people in the room wouldn't allow it to exist. That person would feel so uncomfortable with their own behaviors because nobody would accept them, nobody would receive them, that the
Right.
bullying behaviors would actually stop. So, what I want to say to students, if you're listening to this, is you are the powerful one. You have the voice that can make the significant change. And don't worry about changing the whole world. Worry about changing your world. Worry about changing the world that surrounds you. Worry about the peers that you come in contact with every day, whether it's in your social studies class or on a football field or in a music class or wherever it may be. Think about those people. Those are your people. Those are the people that you get to potentially change the outcome of their life by your
Right.
words and your actions. That's the power that you have. How are you going to use that power to shift culture to something great? And we call that speaking life. And if
Right.
you take on that mantle to say, I am going to be the person in my classroom, in my sports team, in my church, in my wherever it is that you engage in life, I'm going to be that person. You will change your world and you will change the lives of those around you. So, bystanders, you're the answer. You are the
Right.
answer.
Absolutely. Such a beautiful and powerful answer that was. I really loved it actually. We all need to speak up when we see something like this happening in front of us. We all have power to do something at least to influence that situation for
Yeah.
sure. Right. So you touched upon this earlier about empathy. So I want to ask, drill down a bit on that. How can we promote empathy and kindness in our communities as a way to combat bullying?
I think first it is creating environments in which empathy can be stirred up and cultivated. And one of the reasons why a lot of people say to us, why would you choose a film or why would you choose a musical to tell this story? Well, we know that there's so much power in story, there's so much power in music, and there's so much power in art. And when we see those mediums being used to tell stories that allow kids to feel safe, to feel heard, and to feel understood, we allow kids to see something beyond themselves. And so when we wrote this musical, we wrote it by telling the story of the bullied, the bully, and the bystander. All of their stories are told in this musical. And we have so many kids who come back to us. And when we tell the story of one of the bullies that's in the film, which is kind of our prom queen, she's our popular girl, we give a whole background. We hear about her family and the divorce that she's going through and the pain that she's feeling and why she's putting up such a front and why she uses these behaviors to try to protect herself. And every student who watches will say back to us, I never thought about that. I never thought that when someone spoke to me like that maybe it wasn't even about me, that maybe I don't have to take those words on myself because they're really just coming from their pain and what they might be going through. So first of all, I don't have to receive those words. I can leave them to the side because they're not even about me. That's the first thing. And the second thing is, I may not be the answer to this person's problem, but I can certainly respond in an opposite way. And then I can put up a boundary and I can even move away from the situation because it's not about me.
Right.
And when we engage the power of empathy and understanding and even curiosity, that's one of the things we really try and teach students. Like, what if instead of just coming back with, that fighting spirit to fight back, what if instead we sat back and said, I wonder, where is that coming from? What maybe is he going through or she going through? Just, you don't even have to get to the point of empathy always. Sometimes even curiosity will stop us from engaging in a negative way with someone. But curiosity always leads to empathy, because when we get curious, usually we realize there's so much more going on. And that's where empathy starts to become engaged. And then we just treat people differently because it's how we'd want to be treated. When we walk away, we all know when we get up on those bad days and we're like, I'm going to go engage in my life today. And like, I really just want to curl up in a ball in the corner of my room and I don't want to talk to anybody. But we have to go out and we have to engage. We all just hope that somewhere in the course of that day, people will treat us gently and with grace. And so if we can engage that thought when we're dealing with others, that maybe that person is a little rough around the edges today because it's a hard one for them. How can I engage back in an empathetic response? So we can teach kids to do this every day by teaching them small things. Like when you see someone in the hallway and you think, oh man, that's a pretty dress or that's a pretty skirt, like say it out loud, speak that out, say, hey, you look so pretty today. Could literally change not just their whole day, it could change their whole week just because you just didn't think it, you said it. What if you see somebody sitting alone and for the first time you step out of your comfort zone and either invite them or just go sit with them, ask them their name. Just somebody being willing to learn someone else's name can change them completely, because so many people are just passed every day and nobody seems to care. Show that you care. And there's so many simple ways that we can do that. And parents, we can teach this at home. What about a Post-it note on our kids' mirror in the morning? What about a quick text message in the middle of the day to just remind them, not of the 4 things you don't want them to forget that they have to get done today, but how about telling them something amazing they did this week that really touched you, that really made a difference to you, and why you just love them for who they are. When we can show this and emulate this as parents, and then administrators create classrooms and environments and safe spaces where you are just literally pouring kindness out onto your kids. I promise you, when they are swimming in kindness and love and acceptance, it will be returned and it'll be cultivated inside the culture of those spaces. So it's up to us as adults to lead in this. And when we lead, kids are going to catch on and they're going to learn, wow, look at how much positive attention comes back to me when I give that to others.
Absolutely. It is one of the best things, best feelings to see your kid showing kindness to others.
Yes.
Whenever I see my son doing something kind to a kid on the road or a worker's kid, etc., I feel really, really proud of him and happy to see that, right? So make positivity louder. That's more.
Yes, I love that.
Right. So let's talk about the elephant in the room, which is cyberbullying. We
Yes.
have reached a time when cyberbullying has taken precedence above everything. So, how can we address the issue of cyberbullying, which is prevalent in today's digital age?
Yeah. There's so much research and conversation coming out right now around a lot of these apps.
Right,
I think that parents need to understand this first, and then we need to share this with our children. Is that at this day and age, at this era that we live in, the most important commodity that a business can buy is your attention.
right,
They are looking for your attention and they are looking for your eyeballs on their apps and on their platforms for as long as possible. And so,
right,
because of that, everything is formulated on these apps to be addictive. And these addictive behaviors are literally scientifically calculated so that you will not stop scrolling, you will not take your eyeballs off, that you'll go into these deep dives and these engagements that just pull away from your time, your energy, and the essence of really who we are as human beings. I mean, it just robs us of almost everything. And
right,
honestly, they're counting on it. They're
right,
expecting it. They scientifically calculated it. And I want to say that out loud because I want to say, first of all, parents, we're dealing with these addictions as well. Like we're
right,
dealing with this stuff too. And so we're sitting there going, how am I going to help my child not get caught up in all this when I'm still trying to figure that out, when I'm still trying
right,
to figure out how do I not have the screen time on this thing at the end of the week that it says, like, how did I get stuck? And
right,
so know that everything's working against you. And I think that's important to know because you don't need to feel like you're bad or wrong. You don't.
right,
It's set up that way. So approach it like you would anything else in life that's set up for an outcome. So the only way that we can intercept that is
right,
by legitimately setting up the types of boundaries that actually help us not to get caught in the cycle. And we've got to do
right.
that same thing for our children. And so, will we fully ever be able to stop the type of language, the back and forth, those types of things that are going on? I don't know if we have answers to those things yet, except cultural change that we've been talking about from a human
Right,
to human perspective that could
right,
change that. But what we can do is this thing doesn't have power over us when we don't turn it on. And so we need to just remember that with our children, first of all, check their age before you hand it to them. Make
right.
sure that that child has a strong sense of who they are before you put an incredibly powerful and potentially destructive tool into their hand. And be incredibly careful about when they do have it, that you're monitoring it and that you're also having open conversations with them about where they are, how they're spending their time. And parents, make sure you have access because you need access to be able to get in there and to be checking. That is for their safety. It's not an invasion of their privacy in the same way that
Right.
you would protect them and lock the door at night to make sure nobody comes into this home to harm them. Don't make sure they come into the home through this phone to harm them. You need to put up all the protective barriers that you need to put there. It is your responsibility. It's not an invasion of privacy. And so make sure
Absolutely.
that you are protecting them. And then I would say the more that we can cultivate healthy practices with our kids from the youngest age, it'll help them as they get into their adulthood to be well-developed human beings who realize that it doesn't control them and that they can use it for business or advancing their career or even some fun sometimes, but it doesn't have to be their whole human experience. And I think that
Absolutely.
that's something that we have to start as young as possible because we don't actually know yet
Right,
what this does to a child. We don't
right, right,
really truly know. But what
right,
we're seeing is not positive. And so, parents, I would just say get incredibly involved, have hard conversations between you and your partners about what you need to be doing because they're watching. And if we're not putting up our own boundaries, they're like, when you put boundaries on them, they're like, well, mom, you're on your phone 24/7. Like, why are you telling me? So
right.
even remembering that what we do is more important than even what we say. And so
Absolutely.
making sure that we're putting up those boundaries ourselves. But this is a world in which I think we're all learning what to do and how to do it. And if we could write our second film right now, we have talked about the number one topic being about how we can help kids and families work through what it is to have this device in our life every day, all day.
Right, right. I remember. One of my ex-colleagues, I remember, he has written a book on digital detox for the
Yes.
family, for the family. So it's an amazing book.
Yeah, I would love to get those books and I'll read that book. That sounds like an amazing book, but we all need
Yeah,
to be doing it and don't again, don't feel shame around it. Like we're
yeah,
all faced with something that was meant to addict us. And so really
absolutely.
we have to be incredibly intentional to counteract that.
Absolutely. Right. So we have reached the final question on bullying before we speak about, the company of yours, Speak Life Performing Arts, etc., the programs you run, etc.
Mhm.
So the last question is, there are certain root causes of bullying which we hardly speak about, like social inequality, discrimination, prejudice. What can
Yes.
be done to address these root causes?
Yeah, I think we all are made up of the experiences in which we have, usually from a very, very, very young age. And
Right,
each of us come from different families and different cultures and different communities that value different things.
right,
And unfortunately, that has led to a lot of prejudice. It has led to a lot of um, just verbal bullying and abuse that takes place within our culture on a daily basis. You know, politics is so volatile in our day and age. It can be so divisive. We just got through an incredibly divisive pandemic that
right,
separated families, separated cultures, separated communities. There's so much divisiveness in our culture. I can't say enough about how that has been a factor that has escalated the bullying, especially cyberbullying. I mean,
right,
there was a point during the pandemic where I don't think people knew how to breathe correctly without getting
right,
judged or getting, or getting hate thrown at them. You couldn't be right. One
right,
side thought one thing, one side thought another thing. It was very, very, very difficult to manage.
right,
And think about how we felt. This is what I always say to adults. Think about how hard that was for us to manage. Like, can you even imagine in a formidable mind of a child, what it was for them to go through the last 3 years and to
right,
try to figure out a world when they still haven't even figured out themselves or,
right,
what their future is. So I think it's so important that we understand that what our kids are experiencing post pandemic,
right,
the volatile age in which we live, we have to become so much more proactive about things that bring us together and
right,
bring us to those Me Too moments and bring us back to the power of empathy in order to combat the divisiveness of the culture.
right,
Because if we can't see what makes us alike more prominently than what makes us different, we will always remain divided. And so, how do we cultivate the conversations about what we're all human? There's so many things that make us the same and make us connect. And the biggest is that we're all in search of connection and love. That's what we're
right,
all in search of. So, how does that bring us together? And how do we cultivate conversations in our schools, in our communities, and in our homes about the things that make us the same as opposed to the
right.
things that make us different. So parents, think about that. Like, I have to think about it because when I have a political conversation with my husband, I got to think like, who's in the room listening? And are they listening to like a lot of negativity going back and forth as we're trying to manage it and understand it?
Right,
How do I make sure that that's counteracted by really important conversations where I teach my kids about, hey, we might have differing opinions and that's okay. It doesn't mean we
right,
have to hate each other. It doesn't mean we have to be divided by these things. We can
right.
actually find common ground. And what does that look like?
Absolutely. Such a beautiful, beautiful insights from you. I can't thank you enough for that. So that is, we have come to the end of question on breaking the cycle of bullying. But the last questions of my show is always about the guest who comes on the show and their journey. So your journey is nothing less of a miracle, I'll say, because I've never seen anybody having such an interesting path or what do you say? What do you call it? Purpose in life, right?
Yes. Yes.
You are the director of Speak Life
Mhm.
Performing Arts Company. Tell us about how did this amazing journey start, and what do you do? What kind of programs you run?
Yes. So my husband and I knew two things. We loved the arts and we loved working with young people. Like that, those were the two things we knew as we kind of entered the world in our careers. And we really stumbled into this whole area of bullying. And like I said, this was in 2001. We were just starting the conversation here in the US about this. And we found ourselves in a meeting with a bunch of other people who were also working in our community with young adults and young people. And they introduced us to a book by a gentleman named Frank Peretti. And this was his first work of nonfiction. And he began to tell the story about how he was horrifically bullied in his elementary school years. He had had some physical disfigurements, and kids had just horrifically bullied him because of it. And he was the first one in our experience that said the thing nobody was saying, which was, bullying is not a rite of passage. Bullying is a form of abuse. And we must intervene as adults and as educators and as parents to end this cycle so that our kids have the opportunity to grow up healthy, mentally healthy, physically healthy, and be able to pursue their dreams. And so as he began to say this, I mean, I don't think there was a dry eye in the room. I think we were done. There was over 30 adults that you just saw wiping the tears because we were all connecting. We all understood. We all had our own wounds and our own pain. And so as we were leaving the room, my husband and I said to the person who was running the meeting, like, we just can't walk out. Like, we need to do something about this. And he looked back at us and he said, well, you are the artists. Go do something. And so that literally were words that changed our life. And so we went back. We had a small volunteer staff team at the time, and we wrote the first rendition that looked entirely different than the musical that exists today. But we wrote that, and we just literally started knocking on the doors of schools and saying, hey, you know, we have this production. Could we bring it in? And we just want to share it in a school assembly. And schools slowly but surely started to say yes. We started out in the state of New York, and we ended up touring to over 31 states. We toured, I think it was something like 13 or 14 different tours with over 250 international artists that came in from around the world that would volunteer their time to get out and to do this work in schools. And we saw an impact of over 390,000 students with the live musical. And that brought us all the way up until 2020. And then, of course, we know as the world shut down, there were so many moments in there that were so difficult. But I think one of the things it gave to all of us was this opportunity to think more clearly about what we did with our life on a daily basis. Right. So we always knew we wanted to scale this because we had so many schools who wanted it that we couldn't physically get to be able to perform the show live for the students. We also had such a strong outcry from our administrators for follow-up materials so that students could continue those conversations after we would leave. And so we made a partnership with the Justin Simmons Foundation. Justin Simmons is a safety for the Denver Broncos. He's an amazing gentleman. Him and his wife love kids, love working with at-risk kids, and they helped fund the film. And we brought it to film like Hamilton on Disney Plus. And so It's done in a very professional manner. It still looks like a live musical being performed on stage. But we were able to do it with professional actors and all professional production. And with that, we worked alongside incredible administrators to produce an entire curriculum that now sits alongside of it. It's lesson plans that go alongside each song in the film. And so students get to dive into the lyrics of the music. We worked with a Nashville artist who helped rewrite all of our music. And so that's now on Spotify. Kids can download the music afterwards, listen to it over and over, and cultivate these important conversations that they need to be having. And our goal in this is to give them a safe place where they can tell their stories. Because the most important thing a mental health professional ever said to us when we said, how can we truly have the important conversations? They said back to us, it's not necessarily what they're saying, it's that we keep them talking. And so it's so important that we're creating these safe spaces for our students to tell their stories. So the entire goal of the film is that students will see the stories of these four characters, that they'll have some Me Too moments, that they'll connect, that they'll say, oh, there's me, and there's me, and there's me. And, oh, I see that person, and that they begin to see their world in a wider, a much broader way, both how they want to act and also the difference that they can really make inside their own schools and communities. And what we're doing now is realizing that it's not enough just to be in schools. Like, we need to get this type of a program into all the spheres that influence a child's life. So we've just now produced the form in a way that it can go into faith-based programs. So it's available to churches now. And we're now working on a home product that will allow the film and some lesson plans for parents to help us cultivate these important conversations. A lot of what we talked about today, those materials and resources will be there. And then we're also creating a program for community organizations like Boys and Girls Club and Girl Scouts and camps and places where we can have these conversations when we're working with kids during the summer and other programs. So our goal is culture shift. And if we're gonna shift culture, we need to get this positive program into as many different spaces in which it can impact a child's life. And that's our goal as a company.
Absolutely. I'm pretty sure you will hit all those goals because these are really, really special goals. I'm so grateful for you and your work and your time today to come on the show, Rebecca. And I wish you all the best on the journey ahead. Let's stay in touch and speak soon later.
Thank you. And we invite everyone, visit our website. I'm sure you'll have all that in the show notes, but please
Absolutely.
come. And moms, we have an incredible program for you to get involved and get this program to your school called Mombassadors. Thank you so much for giving us this opportunity to have this important conversation. And thank you for listening, because we can truly make a difference and we can create a Speak Life culture in our schools and communities.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you so much, Rebecca. Speak to you soon.
Bye-bye.
So that was Rebecca. I am super grateful for people like Rebecca and her husband in this world, right? We need more Rebeccas and more Speak the Life musical type of concepts in this world. There is severe lack of empathy, especially with kids. Our future generations need all these interventions. So check out speaklifethemusical.org. Check out their products. See how you can get involved, how you can make an impact if you're in the US or anywhere in the world for that matter. And this was episode 65. I will meet you all next week with another guest. Until then, take care, stay safe. Thank you.